All right. So hello, everybody. Thank you so very much for joining this, our first STEAM Salon of the 2020-2021 academic year. Holy cow, what COVID. I'm going to blame COVID for that. My name is Jody Coulter. I am the Life Sciences and Outreach Librarian here at the University of Maryland. And we are very, very happy that you're here to join us. Please remember to keep your cameras and microphones off during this presentation because we have a very good one and we want to make sure we can hear it all. So I would like to introduce our two speakers today, Natasha Andrade, who is the newly elected Associate Chair for Undergraduate Programs and a Senior Lecturer at Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. She has been teaching and conducting research at the CEE department since 2014 and has a fierce passion for undergraduate education. Her areas of research focus on engineering education research, fate and transport of organic chemicals, and mercury contamination due to illegal gold mining. We also have with us David Tomblin, who is the director of the College Park Scholars Science, Technology, and Society program, and a senior lecturer with appointment in the A. James Clark School of Engineering. He has served in this capacity since 2013 and has taught at the University of Maryland since 2009. He is a distinguished Fearless Faculty Fellow and with the Academy for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and a member of the Engineering Education Research Group at the University of Maryland. His areas of research focus on the integration of socio-technical systems thinking into STEM education and public engagement with science and technology. And I'm so happy that they're here. I heard them speak earlier at a different conference and it was fantastic. So without any further ado, I'll pass it over to you both.
Welcome and thank you for having us, and welcome to everybody. I hope that you enjoy the presentation. I don't know if David want to say hello before we start. We're going to share the presentation. So.
Hello. I'll jump in about halfway through.
All right, sounds good. So I'm going to share my screen with you. All right, you should be able to see that now. And I'm going to jump right in. This is a project that David and I have been working on for maybe three years now, and it revolves around one of my classes, one of the courses that I teach. So the idea behind this project is that the engineering curriculum tends to focus on the technical aspects of engineering. And a lot of the times, if you're trying to introduce systems thinking or, social impact of technology, this can become really complicated within the technical context of an engineering class, of course. So we decided to take this head on, even though it can be really complicated. We decided to take this head on in one of my courses, but also try to do some analysis of how we were doing and how the students were responding to this kind of content addition. So we chose a course that I teach every semester in my department. It's a required sophomore level courses, so all of the students in our department have to take it. And it's basically a calculation-based course. It also contains a lot of ABET, which is our accreditation program, ABET requirements, and also FE requirement is Fundamentals of Engineering, which is an exam that our students take to get the professional engineering title later on in their careers. So my course is required for everybody, and I have a lot of learning outcomes that I need to meet with this course. But the course itself is called Engineering for Sustainability. So because it's about sustainability and sustainable development, it gives me an opportunity to introduce a lot of different content within the calculation-based context. This course also introduces breadth into our curriculum. So the folks that usually focus on infrastructure, for example, still have to take this course, and that gives them a little bit of an environmental perspective on their curriculum. The activity itself is, it usually takes 2 class times. I teach 75-minute long classes. So for the first activity, for the first day of the activity, they have an individual quiz on ELMS online before they come to class. And this obviously has been adapted for COVID because I'm fully online now, but this, before COVID, they came to class and then they got together, read some articles, and developed something similar to what you see on your screen right now. Just basically a list of stakeholders regarding electric vehicles and how these stakeholders interact with this technology of electric vehicles. So it's very active learning, right? They're up and about the classroom. They're walking around, interacting with different groups. They interact within themselves, but also with different groups. It's very active. The second day in the classroom, they do also group work, but it's more a worksheet. And that day, the activity goes not only, it encompasses not only electric vehicles, but also autonomous vehicles. So it kind of adds complexity to the topic, and it also adds a lot of systems thinking to the activity. So they work on a worksheet, and then obviously they have a follow-up quiz after the activities in class. And this is what we're going to present today. This is the question that we coded to answer our research questions. So this is what the students are asked. How do you think driverless vehicles and the infrastructure changes that accompany it will shape people's lives, and how will people shape the development of driverless vehicles? So they have about 1 paragraph to answer that question, and then David and I code the answers. This activity is relying on previous work. So this is some of the initial results that we had, and David is going to get from the presentation from here.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So as Natasha said, what we're presenting today is building off of previous work we had done, just establishing to what extent one of the goals of this project was, can we influence how much these students are thinking in terms of systems complexity, and also more specifically, like the social complexity, right? So does this cause them to think more about, the social influences on science and technology? And so, some of the early results were, yeah, it seems to increase an appreciation of system complexity, especially in terms of the number of stakeholders involved. Like, so if you think back to one of the images that Natasha showed, and it had a long list of stakeholders, and they were identifying all these stakeholders and seeing how they interact with electric vehicles, right? And so that was surprising to them. Also, kind of the deeper understanding of social influences on technology, which we'll get more into here in a second. And then an ability to identify second order social impacts, such as, like, for example, all right, it's commonly said that electric vehicles will help curb carbon emissions, right? Well, really, it's more complex than that. It won't actually directly help unless the source of energy is coming from renewable energy, right? So kind of identifying those kind of second layers of interactions. And then another thing we noticed was that students are heavily influenced by their assigned readings, which, that tells us that they're relying heavily on what we're giving them, as opposed to, bringing some outside information in. So that's maybe something that we needed to work on, kind of bring in their own experiences. All right, so go ahead. So this brought us to some new research questions, right? So we had a general sense that the amount of, conversation around social influences was increasing through some of the coding we had done. But we didn't, at that point, we were just looking more grossly at, okay, is the amount of conversation around social influences increasing? Is it about the same? Is it even less relative to like, conversations about the technical aspects of electric vehicles? And so we wanted to know more deeply what they were actually talking about. So that's what this first question is about. The second question kind of digs even deeper into this. It looks at like, okay, all right, so we're seeing more specifically what they're talking about, and we're putting them into these different categories, which we'll show you later. But are they thinking about it in instrumental terms, which is more based on like productivity and efficiency, or are they expanding that out in non-instrumental terms and looking at things like human well-being more broadly? All right. So, okay. So the next, Natasha.
Sorry, it's coming.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. No, it's hard. It's hard to take the cues. So the research methods that we followed, as Natasha mentioned, we used various types of coding. Initially, just to understand, how much social thinking had gotten into the conversations, we used thematic coding. So we had a number of thematic codes like, all right, technology. So statements that involve technical conversation, infrastructure, statements that involved, conversation about different kind of infrastructural aspects of the situation, statements like social statements, political statements, environmental, economic, right? And so that kind of gave us a sense of like, what the conversations were focused on. And what we did was we had that initial quiz and we coded that for like how much of those different types of comments were. And then we coded the last question to see, whether there was a relative shift in conversation in terms of how much was technical versus social, right? Then for this project, we took those social statements and also the political statements and the economic statements, and we did open coding. So we didn't have predefined categories. We used the open coding to understand what kinds of kind of main themes emerge out of the things they were talking about. And we'll show you what those main themes are. So that's kind of, what are they saying, right? Instead of imposing something, a code on them. And then after that, we looked at whether it was instrumental or non-instrumental, right? And so here's our definitions of instrumental. So instrumental thinking kind of narrowly defines relationships with technology in terms of productivity and efficiency. And also it tends to treat technology as neutral or depoliticized, right? And this is kind of rhetoric that you typically find with engineering students. And so here's an example. Driverless cars will eliminate the human emotion factor in driving on the road and ultimately protect people from getting into accidents, right? So all you need to do is get rid of the human factor and then everybody's going to be safer, right? And so it's very kind of rational, productive efficiency kind of thinking. Non-instrumental is more broadly thinking about, human well-being, mental well-being, community, so aspects that are not kind of productivity, efficiency driven, right? And so they tend to be more complex, harder to understand. And so here's a statement that a student used to it's illustrated as non-instrumental thinking, right? Furthermore, there will be much less need for parking in cities with which allow for increased greenery and bike lanes, making it much more pleasant to live in the city. So it's not really necessarily about, we're going to increase parking efficiency. It's also about, well, it might increase human well-being. And so there's kind of like a nice complex connection between one thing leading to some other social factor that's not necessarily related to productivity. So what we would like you all to participate here for a few minutes and code, so we have the two different types of thinking. We have instrumental thinking and non-instrumental thinking. And I believe Natasha put the definitions into chat. And so we have 2 student quotes, and we would like you all to decide for yourselves what category they fall into. And you could also say mixed if you want to, because that was also a category we had. And why you put that into that category. So just, you know, take a minute or 2 to think about this, and I guess a minute, and put something in the chat, and we'll discuss it. But Natasha, why do we wait? And I think people are, let's do one at a time.
Okay, one at a time. All right, got it.
Give people a chance to.
David, I don't know if you can see the chat or not, but people are saying mixed because discusses efficiency but also impact. Other people are saying this would fall into instrumental because it focuses on efficiency, like on production rather than human interaction.
Okay. All right.
Maybe you can discuss.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, yeah, why don't we go to the next example and then kind of maybe have a discussion afterwards?
Okay.
Yeah.
Here it is.
All right, so here's the second one. And again, code it for instrumental, non-instrumental, mixed, and why. So someone said instrumental because it's focused on productivity instead of if constantly using that time for productive uses is beneficial to the mental well-being of the individual. Another person said this seems like a mixed approach, still focused mainly on efficiency, but acknowledge that this has an impact on people and relationships, albeit without a great deal of nuance. I'm leaning towards non-instrumental, especially toward the end because of strained relationships, but I'm not going to lie, this one made me laugh a little. Instrumental focus on productivity efficiency, but non-instrumental because there's a discussion of human interaction and growth. I would also say mixed for second one, use of time by individuals and relationships. Second mixed. Okay. All right. Nice. So, you know, I feel like, how should we do this, Natasha? How should we?
Well, I think we can explain how we coded it.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I think you know, you're seeing some of the dilemmas that we have in terms of how you code something like this, right? So especially for student number 53, it does kind of start off with kind of this productivity and efficiency kind of narrative about, being able to, parents being able to work and get things done. But at the same time, it's a little conflicted, right? There's a little bit of worried about what's going to happen to the children's relationship. So yeah, we would definitely code this one as mixed, and put it in both categories. The other one, the other one, we primarily put that into productivity, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's more about it's dominated by getting things done for work. Although I hear you about even eat breakfast, but it's like it's eating breakfast in the service of getting work done. So that's kind of how we interpreted this one. So, but yeah, coding can be interpreted, right? So, yeah.
I think,
so Natasha?
Yeah, that leads into the second part of this discussion, and that was how we coded played a role in the interpretation of the study and what the students were saying and the answering of the research questions. So both David and I coded the questions separately, and then we kind of reconciled. We had a meeting or several meetings where we talked about the coding and came together to get a final coding. And I think overall what we see is that, and that's shown in a lot in the example, in the second example that we gave you, that students bring out non-instrumental thinking a lot more when they think about their relationships with their parents, right? Some like stakeholders that they really can personally connect to. So quality of life and strained social relationships was something that brought out a lot of non-instrumental thinking. And for the most part, everything else was really focused on efficiency and productivity, which we coded as instrumental thinking. But overall, I think our results, we coded around 189. We have more now, but we coded for the study 189 student responses, and around 54% was instrumental and around 46% non-instrumental. So we think that the activity that we do in class actually helps. But I think there's always room for improvement. So we try to understand a little bit deeper, okay, where are the students drawing these ideas from? And that kind of answers the second research question that we had. So the first construct that the students really rely on is related to free market idealism, which is basically the idea that they see themselves as consumers. So there is a certain technological development, and this adoption is based on capitalism, that themselves as consumers can dictate what the technology is going to be all about. And the consumers themselves shape what the market comes out with in terms of technology. What we think of, and this can be exemplified by this one student. I'm just going to give you a couple seconds to read it. So this student really showcases, okay, we as consumers, and because we have different buying powers, we're going to shape how industry, rolls out these vehicles and what is the market price for these vehicles. But we think that this construct that students use is missing the fact that the private sector, folks creating technology, play a big role in shaping the market for their own economic gain, right? So companies that develop new technologies have a lot of economic power, but they also have a lot of lobbying power. So they can work with federal legislation and local legislation as well to kind of shape how the technology is going to roll out, and market prices for the technology as well. Another construct that students use is technological determinism, and this kind of conflicts with the first construct in that students see themselves as powerless unless they are either consumers or if they're technical experts that are actually developing the technology. But if they're not consumers, if they remove themselves from that position of consumers, then they feel really powerless, and then they have to adapt to the technology as the technology is thrown at them. And we relate that to notions of cultural lag, which is like, okay, some technologies take time because people need time or need persuasion to adapt to the new technologies. And an example of a student bringing out that construct is here. So this student says, you know, if people do not trust these products, they will not invest in them. And it's like the company needs to gain the trust of the people. And what's missing from this construct is that people are actually change agents, right? We do have a lot of agency, not only as consumers, but mainly as members of society. And a lot of the times we may not need the technology that's thrown at us. And I think people have the power to choose what technology to use or to buy into. And the last social construct and engineering construct that the students rely on is technological neutrality thesis, which basically says that technology is neutral, that if the technology is used unethically, that's solely because of human behavior and not because the technology itself is unethical. So it is always relying on the fact that the technology is neutral, and this can be exemplified by the student 79 here. I love this example, and I certainly can relate with Jody on the chat. She said that made her giggle. We certainly had our share of giggles while going through student work here. But this is a great example of a student thinking that technology is neutral, right? That the technology is going to protect people from getting into accidents because, you know, the technology is perfect and neutral, and it's only because of human behavior that we have car accidents. What's missing from this, obviously, is that we are the ones, humans, are the ones that design technology. And obviously, we input all of our bias into the design of technology, which completely negates any notion that technology could be neutral, right? It's all our own thinking that goes into the design of technology. So just to wrap up and finalize our thoughts, we think that bringing in social impact of technology and removing this socio-technical duality for engineers is really important. And we think that we should do more of that in classroom discussions. And we do see that the students are influenced by that. So there is positive change here. But we do, as instructors, we do have to be careful with how we present the content because the students are heavily relying on the material that we provide them for readings, for example. So we do have to be careful with how we present it. And a lot of the times, there is a whole culture around engineering, right? The social constructs that we talked about, the three that we mentioned, are alongside many other constructs that are part of this engineering identity, which really relies on heavy technical aspects of the profession. So it can go, if we start to talk about this, it can go against the students' identities and their social constructs. So there can be a lot of pushback from students on this. But we do think that that's important, that we should keep doing it. And maybe the best way to approach this in the classroom is to use stakeholders that students can really connect to. So make it really personal for them. And that can break down the instrumental thinking that they have. So hopefully that helps students become instrumental thinkers and non-instrumental thinkers, which we think is going to make their engineering designs a lot more appropriate for society in general. And I think that's all I have, unless David has something else that he'd like to mention.
We have a question. Sarah asks, did any of the students question the neutrality of technology?
I don't think we saw that directly.
No.
I don't think so.
My own experiences where I actually do lessons on this, it is a major struggle to get them beyond that. So, but yeah, we actually, yeah, if it was there, it was rare, but we didn't see it.
Yeah, I don't think we saw any of that.
Can you give an example of instrumental thinking breakdown with relatable stakeholders? Did you find one stakeholder had more of an impact?
Yeah, so what we did for our project was we had a baseline. So the students, before we came into class and did the activities, they did an online quiz. And we also coded that baseline, right? So that was a question, same question as they answered at the end of all of the activities, but without any background information whatsoever. So we used that as a baseline, and we saw that that baseline was very instrumental. A relatable stakeholder that would break down instrumental thinking from that baseline later on was families. They usually relate with families. So this idea of, okay, if I have an autonomous vehicle, I'm going to be able to spend more time talking with my dad about something like sports that I really enjoy. So if it was that kind of stakeholder, really personal to them, they would be able to break down. So they could see that autonomous vehicles would be great, not only for productivity, but also for being closer to their dad, so that was it.
And so, just to add on to that a little bit, so in that exercise, we presented 3 or 4 stakeholders. I think it was 3. So we had a realtor, an urban planner, and then a middle-class family of 4 as like the stakeholders. And they really struggled with, like the urban planner and the realtor. And, I think a lot of it has to do with they are not familiar with what these people do, but, it was hard for them to think about those people. So it tells you, they need to learn more about these stakeholders that, it should be part of what they do is learn about stakeholders, because their imagination is very limited on these kinds of things.
Yeah, and in the first activity, we asked them, okay, list as many stakeholders as you can think of. And with regards to electric vehicles, and they start out with 5 and then they start struggling, like, how many other people? Oh my God, there's so many stakeholders that are involved with electric vehicle technology, and they can only come up with 5. And then as they start, okay, struggle with it, and then they're able to generate a larger list. But only that part of recognizing how many people are involved in a single technology is hard for them.
It also gets at diversity, right? So, you know, they like to lump everybody into society. And so, you know, breaking society down into its components can be kind of difficult for them. So they have this monolithic idea of what the public is. Or the word consumer, right? They want to throw out the word consumer. And so it's like, well, what kinds of consumers are there? Or you know, even like the government. Well, the government is a lot of different things. It has different levels. There's different agencies. They have different roles within those agencies. And, you know, and so really, I mean, getting them to pull that stuff apart is important work.
Mm-hmm.
I have so many more questions, but I'm going to wait for a minute and see if there's any other questions coming in from any of our audience members.
Sarah had a last question on how did we decide on instrumental, non-instrumental coding system. And I think that was 2 things. We did a thematic coding in the beginning based on what my class is about. So infrastructure, you know, transportation, things like that. But then when we went to the open coding, we were kind of getting a sense of how the students were talking about things. So we broadened up to the open coding, and then based on David's expertise, because he comes from the STS background, that's where that instrumental, non-instrumental came from.
So there's some, in the STS and engineering education literature, there's some work around, you know, the idea of like different types of thinking, and one of the breakdowns is instrumental versus non-instrumental as to how STEM majors operate. So, and they're thinking about social factors. So we borrowed from that.
So that actually ties in a little bit with the question that I was hoping to ask. Do you think this leaning on instrumental thinking is particular to engineering students? Like you just mentioned that there's more, you know, sort of like a broader STEM thought, but like how prevalent do you think this is in sort of some other STEM fields?
My sense, since I actually deal with, in my program, I deal with more than just engineer majors, is it's pretty pervasive. Like computer science students are, I mean, I don't know, I'm about ready to make a normative claim, but they might even be further down the road than engineers. And they certainly have less training, and, you know, they're like, you can't find ethics courses in the computer science department. So, I mean, I think they're starting to develop some upper level stuff, but it's not even really there. So, so yeah, computer science definitely. But I think, you know, I think a lot of this comes from the way people talk about science and technology at the high school level. This is where they learn it,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of high school courses don't really get into the, you know, the broader impacts, right? You know, so.
Jim had a question. Did anyone mention driving as an expression of personal power or autonomy, beating the competing driver to the next slide? And yes, the students did talk about that. We were really interested when it came out as a skill, like driving as a skill that we're going to eventually lose because we're no longer going to need to drive. So we thought that was very very interesting. And yeah, there is the typical, oh, I want my car to, make lots of noise when I drive and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah, there was kind of an interesting divide in some of the class where there were definitely students that were more on the, I don't want to get near autonomous vehicles. And one of the reasons is, autonomy. And of course, when you look at the population more broadly, I do research on this more broadly with public engagement in science and technology. Autonomy is one of the biggest kind of reasons to resist autonomous vehicles among the public. So, yeah. Michelle had a question too. I think we skipped Michelle's question.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah. Have you experienced pushback from what students have learned in other classes? Engineering courses and economic courses can teach rigid paradigms.
Yeah, there is a quote that we always use from one of the students, and they said, we always ask feedback from the students, was this activity helpful? And we had a few students saying, no, it was horrible because it was so hard because it made me think so much. And we were like, yes, that's it. That's what we want. It's the kind of bad feedback that we really want.
Yeah. But a lot of them won't even admit it that it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard, but it's not the kind of hard that counts, And
so I was thinking not even so much like it's hard. Like, so I have a degree in economics. Now that was a long time ago, but some of like what you're teaching against is kind of what was like ingrained into how what I was taught people behaved. So if I had taken several classes in that mantra and then I came in and had this, it would be not just the hard thing, it would be hard for me to believe it could be correct.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm being articulate at all.
No, and it's true. I mean, economics has a long history of treating humans as rational beings, and it's part of the model of macro. I'm not going to even try to sort that out because I'm not an economist, but the rational human being, and of course that's starting to come unraveled in the last 20 years. But yeah, it's had a huge influence on the way everybody thinks about how things work in this world.
I just started thinking like of the power, like so-and-so taught me this, and now you're, anyway.
Yeah, that will usually come out in course evaluation comments for me, like, oh, this is not an engineering class, even though it's so calculation based still. This is not an engineering class. She's trying to transform this class into a communication class or something like that. That usually comes out as feedback.
Yeah, I think, I teach a lot of, this is all I teach, and I teach computer scientists and engineers mostly. And there's resistance, but it's not really kind of what you would think of as a well-argued intellectual resistance, like what you're saying, like, oh, well, my economics professor said this. Because I don't think I think it's so taken for granted that they aren't like taking arguments from one place and moving it to another, right? And it's just, so the resistance, I think, is just more general, kind of things they've picked up. So Jim Miller, we already answered. So Eliza, what about learning to drive as a rite of passage, an expression of young adulthood?
Yeah, I think that came out for sure.
Yeah.
We did have some students mention that, yes.
But, I wonder, so many of them don't drive while they're in college. I don't know if it's valued sometimes. But yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah. Sarah, yes, due to being an engineer and growing up with engineers, I still have to turn off my expectation that people will act rationally. It is great that you are getting students to think differently earlier. Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, the hope is that we can do this more broadly within the engineering bachelor, curriculum, because we know from literature, from years of engineering education research, that just a single class is not enough to change a very, robust mindset that the students bring in. So hopefully we can expand and get more classes to cover this kind of content. And I think there is a big movement now within several people in the engineering school that are really interested in doing this.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's a push from, Ken Kiger, the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Engineering Education, to make engineering ethics, which the way, Nicole Mogul, who's one of my colleagues in STS, teaches it, is more through a systems thinking approach. And so that would be the model for engineering ethics if it gets scaled. And there was a push before COVID hit, and then it was kind of put on a back burner, for probably obvious reasons. So that's nice to see.
And Sarah is asking if we're going to integrate this into capstone and senior design courses. The answer is yes, at least for my department, civil and environmental engineering and mechanical engineering. So I'm working with folks from mechanical engineering on a grant that we got to integrate social and environmental responsibility within engineering design. So we have a lot of courses that are being modified to add this content, including capstone.